Thank you, Hans, for being here today. I know you're a very busy person, so thank you for coming here and answering some questions about the roundtable event we had in January. Nice to see you.
Thanks very much indeed. Likewise, Jean-Pierre.
Brilliant. So, like I said, you recently chaired the roundtable at our European Base Oils and Lubricant online series. For the benefit of those that were unable to make it, could you please give us a 2 to 3 minute summary of the key points that were discussed at your table?
Yeah, thanks very much indeed for that opportunity, Jean-Pierre. First of all, we had a full table. And I even heard that people wanted to join and couldn't, and reached out later via LinkedIn. So I started with supply chain topics. Going through the entire supply chain, not only base oils and additives, but labeling, transport, and last but not least, people. Sort of the HR side of that. I think it was we had actually two distinct groups in that discussion. One is sort of lubricant formulators, or let's say marketers of finished lubricants, and participants who represented either base oil or additive companies, and they have a different view on supply chain because they're one step closer to the customer or further away from it. I think both parties agreed that 2022 was a very difficult year when it came to supply disruptions. It eased a little bit off towards the end. We're still not there, and I think the main topic, for whatever reason, was at the end, particularly automotive gear oil. That seems to be the biggest pain point at the moment. They require a lot of sulfur-based additives, which seem not to be available. So there was a lot of agreement, a lot of discussion why that is. Why did we go to single source or dual source? And also in terms of mitigation, what can you do? And I think there's one major trend I'm seeing. In the past, if I'm just oversimplify, marketers buy a certain base oil, they buy an additive package from any of the reputable companies who provide additive packages for gear oils and blend them. And I think there's now a very, very clear tendency to open up packages, going into packages, trying to understand componentry, not to be at the mercy of any of the major additive companies, but actually having some expertise again and formulating themselves, which might be and I think that was supported, but also everybody agreed that's a very, very sort of midterm mitigation plan for that. If I summarize sort of some of the other mitigations, I mean, you wouldn't be surprised. It's all about demand planning. It's keeping contacts to suppliers throughout the year, not only when there's a crisis. Broadening your supplier base, broadening your knowledge about products, and obviously helping out. On the topic of HR, so finding people, I think that is not only a supply chain issue. I think we see this, but we also heard about how difficult it is to get young folks with either a logistics degree, a business degree, particularly with a natural sciences degree of any sort, into old economy. Lubricants also seen as old economy, very hard to compete against the Googles and the Amazons. But on the other side, we see now maybe they also have their difficulties. They're laying off people, so all these posh, fancy IT modern companies. But it's hard. We have to present ourselves in a different way, I think was the yeast of it, to be that we're not an old-fashioned industry that's very, very at the forefront of things. That's really CO2 reducing activities, getting better lubricants into users' cars, engines, hydraulics, and so forth. I think that's a good summary of where we were without going too much into detail.
So during the roundtable, you said you just mentioned supply chain issues. What were some interesting potential solutions discussed by your table?
I think I mentioned a few of them, going through what we call sort of table stakes, looking differently at suppliers. I think maybe another aspect of the entire table discussion, we were very, very diverse. We had somebody from the Caribbean, from Egypt, obviously from Europe. There was one folk very early in the Americas, and that also gave quite a different spin to things. But we saw there's a lot of overlap between the issues, and again coming up with very, very basic solutions. As I said, starting from very proper demand planning, broadening your supplier base, having far more interaction with suppliers, I think was seen as one of the key activities. You would not be surprised, but I think it was totally forgotten in a world where supplies were easy, where logistics costs were zero, and everything was widely available. I think there's quite of a renaissance of, I think the main key is like the renaissance of supplier relationships are very important at all times.
So, were there any specific examples of changing customer needs that were discussed during the roundtable, and how are companies responding to these evolving preferences, such as lubricants and LinkedIn in combination with one another?
Yeah, supply chain, I think, is a little bit further away from LinkedIn activities, marketing activities. But I think there's certainly
Yeah.
an element of supply chain marketing. So to make sure that you're being heard, that you're being recognized in the marketplace. I don't think there was sort of, the golden nugget, the one solution to it. I think people brought and shared. I think that was very important on this table, and that's what I think people enjoyed. They all shared the experience. We spent quite some time on going through one by one, sharing the experience, and people thought, oh my God, actually they suffer from the same thing. I think the main key takeaway for some was like, they're all in the same not in the different space, they're all in the same space, independent whether they're a lubricant formulator, an additive manufacturer, base oil provider, and whether you are based in Egypt, Caribbean, or Europe. I think there was a lot of insight about common sense, common topics, and seeing I'm not alone in this, and they all suffer from it. I think in terms of customer needs, it's a little bit hand in mouth, particularly in 2022. As I said, I think it's easing a little bit. And I also heard there's quite a backlog of orders in engine oils, but in particular, as I mentioned, automotive gear oils, which was a main surprise to me.
Yeah, so moving away from kind of the standard combustion engine automotives, how did the participants of the roundtable view the shift towards the electric automotives, and what do they see as opportunities and challenges for the industry?
Yeah, thanks. Very good. That was a very good topic. So after 1 hour, we moved to a different topic just to keep it interesting and fascinating. And that actually also, again, some experts on the formulation of electromobility or battery fluids, but also users of it or marketers of these kind of fluids. So we had kind of two discussions at the end. One is, even with all the electric cars, if you consider that at the moment 1.8 billion cars or vehicles are on the road, and if you take a very optimistic view, 5% of new cars every year, of around 80 million vehicles join the car population every year. 5% of that are electric cars. There's still a huge group, a large number of old-fashioned ICE cars in the future. So we have to play both ends. So in terms of development, I think there were lots of discussion about, do major oil companies invest into new engine oil technologies? Or do they just milk what they have? But how do you prepare for electromobility, and how do you actually ramp up the need? So even 5% per year, but it will ramp up very quickly. So how do we go with that? I asked a couple of open questions around, what do you think? Where is it going? Is it oil-based or is it water-based? Is it dielectric controlled? Is it conductive fluids? Are there OEM solutions? Are there industry solutions, national solutions? And I think the answer, we don't know. It's a very murky picture at the moment. So which kind of technology will win? So what we see is a certain, I think one of the outcomes was, I think we see a little bit of a every OEM for himself. Everybody tries to develop a solution which fits their own company, based on either what they did in the past, either on engine oils, on oil fluids, or water-based fluids, with very little cooperation at the moment. A customer might expect some cooperation at some stage, and also history tells us that this is going to happen, that there might be a winning technology at some stage. But it's very open at the moment. I think it's very an open race, and everybody's trying their own things, which is good. But we are looking forward to seeing, in a way, the winning technology for the future.
Brilliant. So you obviously spoke about other topics towards the end of the roundtable. What interesting new perspectives were brought on the topics? Any topics that your guests brought to the discussion?
Yeah, it was a fascinating discussion around artificial intelligence, which came up as maybe a solution tool. And some people had probably played around with ChatGPT already and said, check it out. And I received a lot of LinkedIn comments afterwards that said, thanks for insisting on to use ChatGPT. So they were quite excited. They said, oh, we learned something new. Like, obviously, we talked about the things we're good at, we talk about every day, but they also took some piece of information away, which is using ChatGPT for marketing text. And some people gave some ideas what they did with it. already in their business context. And I think that was also a nice takeaway. That was not talking about supply chain electromobility, but also learning something new, a new tool, and also having a little bit of fun playing with it. I think it was a very strong feedback.
And finally, moving away from the topics and the discussion, what would you say is the advantage of chairing a table as opposed to just joining as an event as a normal guest, as a normal delegate? And would you recommend others to attend some of these online events that we do?
Yes, what I particularly like about the normal format with a presentation, when you learn something new, hear about a company, go into depth. You have the question and answer session. I think it's very useful, but usually people drop out very quickly. There's very little networking opportunity or contributing opportunity. First of all, first observation, I had a full table. Second observation, they all stayed to the very end. Nobody, left after 1 hour or 1 hour 10. They all left or stayed until the very end, which I think is a very, very good sign. I received observation number 3. I received a lot of very positive remarks from via LinkedIn about the discussion, and some people even said, "Oh, I should have contributed more." I think people get a little bit into passive mode throughout the maybe last 2-3 years in video conferences. Some were very active, and that's the reason I think they all enjoyed the discussion. With experts, it was not, they didn't have to sell anything. They didn't have to sell themselves. So it was not challenging, not competitive, really expert. I think there's a lot of merit in there. And I think using both formats might be very useful. I mean, the presentation type, where there's an in-depth topic, but also these kind of topics on the tables. My key takeaways, I should have been more specific on my topics. I think I made it very broad. I made it almost a little bit like a little store about 3-4 topics, and then people came in with different expectations, which I had to bring down. So my takeaways, if I would run the table again, I would be far more precise on what the topic is and maybe what people can mentally prepare for.
Well, thank you for your time, Hans. That was very informative, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thanks very much indeed. Pleasure to be in this again.